everybody. I'm Kent Thoelke. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at PRA Health Sciences, and I'm thrilled to be here today to help celebrate 100 of the smartest and brightest and most innovative folks that PharmaVoice could find in the industry today. What's exciting about today is the people being celebrated today by PharmaVoice are all leaders in the industry and are all helping to raise the bar, both for clinical research, but also for patient care generally around the world. Right now, because of COVID-19, those voices that are making a change are incredibly important. And so when we think about raising the bar, it's not just raising the bar for our industry, but it's raising the bar for how we help patients worldwide deal with COVID-19 and how we manage to make sure that our industry continues to bring critically and life-saving drugs to market during a very challenging time. When I think about things that are impacting us here at PRA Health Sciences, and I think about the impact of COVID-19 and raising the bar, one of the things that we are focused on right now is what COVID has done for us in enlightening everyone to the impact or disproportionate impact of diseases, but specifically in this case, COVID, on ethnically and racially diverse communities. What we are seeing with COVID is that almost 50% or 2 times as many patients in ethnically diverse communities are being affected by COVID. They are disproportionately being hospitalized and disproportionately seeing significant impact by COVID. But beyond COVID-19, what we're seeing is that patients generally in clinical trials tend to be privileged patients who have the ability to take time off to participate in a trial, who have access to medical centers, and they tend to be, for the reality, older white men. What we need in drug development is to ensure that when we test new drugs, we're testing it in all patients to understand the mechanisms of those drugs and how they impact all patient lives and all patients' biologies. And so when we're talking about raising the bar, we're looking at the ability to leverage our processes, but also technology in order to make sure that more patients have access to clinical trials. So how do we democratize access to clinical trials? For us, the way we're doing that is really trying to leverage technology and mobile health and mobile access to ensure that all patients, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their ethnic background or racial background, regardless of their ability to pay or to have access to medical centers, can participate in research. And so simple tools like telehealth and telemedicine, the ability to virtualize clinical trials, helps us ensure that we can democratize access to far more patients and get them included in the research paradigm. Today, the reality is only 3 to 5% of patients that participate in clinical trials come from racially or ethnically diverse background. Similarly, we have a significant gender divide. The number of women that participate in clinical trials is significantly less than the number of men. And what that means is we are developing drugs for a single type or phenotype of patient, which is middle-aged white men. That's simply unacceptable. As an industry, as a group of innovators, as a group of leaders, it will take everybody that is part of this celebration today to make that change happen. We have a moral imperative as an organization. We have a moral imperative as individuals to ensure that clinical trials are not a privileged opportunity for a small group of people. That clinical research as a care option is available to all patients, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnic or racially diverse backgrounds, and that we create an ecosystem that ensures that that access is democratized and available to everybody. What I'm thrilled about is when you look at all the participants today, every one of you has a significant and critical role to play in changing that ecosystem, whether it's a technology background, whether it's a drug development background, whether it is a process background, a safety background. All of us will play a critical role in redesigning and reimagining a clinical trial development system that doesn't exist today. One that imagines that geographic access is not a limitation to participate in research. One that imagines that the ability to participate in a trial isn't dependent upon whether or not you have a job that allows you to take time off so that you can go to the clinic to receive the investigational agent 4 or 5 times more than you would if you were getting standard of care. One that doesn't inhibit you to participate in a trial because of lack of access to health care or to child care. One that removes all of those barriers so that clinical research is truly a care option for everybody. I'm excited for today, and I'm equally excited to hand this off to my colleague, Tammy Klerr, to talk to you about where she sees PRA is raising the bar as part of the Pharma Voice 100 celebration today. Tammy?
Thank you, Kent. Hi, I'm Tammy Klerr, Chief Business Development and Marketing Officer at PRA Health Sciences. I've been fortunate to be in the clinical research field for my entire career. I too would like to extend my congratulations to our top 100 industry leaders, and on behalf of PRA, we're really happy that you're on this journey with us. So how do I think that PRA is raising the bar? One of the reasons I've loved working here is because I feel like we've always been trying to raise the bar, even at times where there was no focus on how much clinical research really needed to change. We were at the forefront of using data to gain further insights into drug development for over 10 years now, so this really isn't new to us. We continued to build on that strategy by making key investments in technology, telehealth, people, and data. We feel very fortunate that these investments culminated in an integrated end-to-end mobile health platform for clinical research. So now more than ever, our data and our connected device technology, along with artificial intelligence and machine learning, have allowed us to combat COVID-19 at speeds that no one has ever seen. We knew drug development had to change, and COVID-19 has certainly been a catalyst to that change. PRA will continue to further enhance the collaboration with our partners and with you to make sure we combine the best of our expertise, people, and technology to continue to battle COVID-19. We are committed to changing the drug development process, both in access and in execution. This journey is never finished. It continually evolves, and we are very privileged to have all 100 of you and your colleagues alongside of us as we endeavor to bring new medicines to patients even faster than we have before. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Limbach, producer of the Pharma Voice Webcast Network, and I'll be your facilitator for our panel entitled Diversity in Clinical Trials and sponsored by our friends at PRA Health Sciences. Let's get on with the program. We're very excited to have an esteemed panel to discuss the importance of diversity in clinical trials. So let's meet our panelists. We have Tami Klerr, a 2012 Pharma Voice 100, who is responsible for global business development, marketing, and strategic planning for PRA Health Sciences, a contract research organization that helps develop life-saving and life-improving drugs with a comprehensive suite of clinical development services, including data management, statistical analysis, clinical trial management, medical writing, and regulatory and drug development consulting. We also have Ken Thoelke, a 2013 Pharma Voice 100. Kent is a pioneer in the application of mobile-first strategies, which integrate clinical trials and provide access directly to patients in both virtual and hybrid virtual models. With more than 25 years of experience in the global drug development, diagnostic, and device industry, Kent understands the global drug development environment and maintains established relationships with international therapeutic experts in several indications. They're joined by Elizabeth Garner, MD, a 2019 Pharma Voice 100. Elizabeth is a seasoned senior executive with more than a decade of experience in a range of therapeutics areas in the pharmaceutical and diagnostics industries, with extensive clinical trials experience in women's health and cancer prevention, including vaccines and diagnostics. And finally, Jessica Scott, MD, JD, a 2020 Pharma Voice 100. Jessica is helping Takeda focus on its goal of developing medicines with patients rather than for patients. She has extensive experience in efforts related to clinical trial transparency, patient centricity initiatives, and bioethical issues. What a group, right? So if you want more information about our thought leaders, please go to pharmavoice100.com, but stay here for now. This session is moderated by Taren Grom, editor of Pharma Voice. Taren, take it away.
Thanks so much, Dan. I'm excited about this panel, and the content couldn't be more relevant. As Kent noted in his introduction, one of the issues that has been brought to light amidst COVID is the continued lack of diversity in clinical trials and the need to change the paradigm so that clinical trial participation is no longer one of privilege. Today, we're going to discuss ways the industry can address health disparities in clinical trials. some of the biggest barriers to recruiting diverse patient populations, and ways to bridge the gaps, the impact of health inequity and patient outcomes because of the lack of diversity, and how technology can be used to bridge some of those gaps. So in our first section, we are going to address ways that the industry can address health disparities in clinical trials. Kent, I know you could talk about this forever, but give me your 2-minute, 30,000 foot perspective, if you don't mind.
Well, I think, the first thing is recognizing you have a problem. I feel like we as an industry have known this is an issue for quite some time, right? We have had a lack of diversity in clinical trials for decades. And so the fact that that continues to happen without significant movement, I think is an issue. And so recognizing that this is a concern is critical. I think that COVID just heightened that. So the relative public nature of the racial disparities amongst COVID highlighted it for everybody. And I think the industry was finally forced to recognize that beyond COVID, we have a problem in clinical trial diversity in general. And so when I talk about kind of moral imperative, this is not just about doing things because we're trying to be politically correct or we think that racial diversity is important. This is really about biology as well. And so we know that biology differs, whether it's between gender or race, and that when we create drugs, when we look at efficacy profiles and safety profiles, we should be looking at those profiles across a broad, diverse population to ensure that the drugs we put on the market, that the indications that they are approved for, that the dosages they have are relevant to each particular population. And the way we do that is by ensuring diversity in clinical trials. The hows to do that is super complex. If it was easy, we would have done it a long time ago. I'm thrilled to see that this conversation has been elevated at an international level and that we're finally seeing, certainly at the top levels down within pharma and biotechs, that the conversation is being publicized highly now.
Excellent points. Couldn't agree with you more, and I do think it does come down to the biology. So if we follow the science, we should be able to figure out some of these complexities, hopefully. And I'm going to hear from one of our pharma counterparts here. Why don't you weigh in here, Jessica? Coming from the sponsor side, I know you have a different, maybe a unique perspective on this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Taren. There's a natural crossover between patient engagement and diversity. Both require us to learn about another's perspective and to understand more deeply about this perspective through two-way dialogue. We need to suspend our own judgment about what another experiences to really bring the open-mindedness to discovering what is important to others. And that's true for patient engagement in the clinical trial development process, and it's also true for diversity. It's a type of deep listening through two-way dialogue that shows respect, affirms dignity, and encourages people to share what's truly important to them. Here's an example of how diversity and patient engagement work hand in hand. A young single mother living in a rural, underserved community helps us understand that to enroll in a rare disease trial, that she would need home health visits, local imaging, and telehealth. We learn about these needs through deep listening through two-way dialogue. Engaging patients in the process of drug development really helps us navigate toward trials that are more accessible to diverse patient populations and the development of medicines that address their unmet needs. At Takeda, we created a culture change to embed patient engagement through a program of progressive key performance indicators. Now, global program teams develop a patient engagement plan, which is a proactive roadmap for engaging patients and patient communities in the process of drug development. Here are a couple examples of diversity-focused efforts currently underway through our patient engagement office. First, we conduct diversity assessments for every patient engagement activity to chart the perspectives that we've included in a particular advisory board or a longitudinal panel of patients, and those that might still be missing. Second, we conduct ongoing patient advisory panels, including one that focuses on racial and ethnic diversity and another on sexual orientation. And we're just getting started.
It's a
I'm
lot.
very pleased, to be here. And thank you for inviting me to this panel, Taren, and thank you to our PRA colleagues. I'm happy to share how patient engagement and diversity work hand in hand, listening deeply to bring diverse insights into our drug development. Clinical trials that include representation from diverse subpopulations help us develop medicines that truly meet the needs of those we serve.
Excellent, Jessica. Thank you so much. It's a lot to unpack there. It just goes to Kent's earlier point about the complexity of this entire issue. And one of those complexities that we discussed during our pre-planning call, Elizabeth, was about the issue of trust. And talk to us about that in terms of your perspective in looking at diversity in clinical trials.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Taren. And Jessica, I think what you just said was just so very important. So it's really, really exciting to hear about what you're doing. One of the things I experienced as a clinical practitioner back when I did see patients and take care of patients was the issue of trust. And as I moved into the industry, I saw the same thing. Trust is a major, major issue. And I do believe very strongly that lack of trust in certain populations, communities, around the country and around the world, really impact the ability to have, really diverse study populations. For people to participate, right, in healthcare, whether it be their own actual healthcare, meaning going to the doctor, getting care, or whether it means, participating in a clinical trial, they absolutely must have complete trust in, not only the individuals that they're working with on a daily basis in terms of, investigators, study coordinators and such, but they also have to have total trust in the companies that are behind the trials. They also have to have great trust in regulatory systems, the regulatory organizations that we rely on, the FDA, CDC as well. All of these things have to come together to allow an individual to say, you know what, I trust all the different pieces here and I'm going to jump in, I'm going to participate. As we know, I think there's been a very, very long history, in particular in the US, of things that have happened in our history that are very painful to think about, but that really, really had an impact, in particular in Black populations, but certainly others as well. You think of Native American populations, and then, sort of even more recently, individuals who may be LGBTQ that have faced, issues around dealing with healthcare. So all of these things, I think, have contributed. And as we've already heard today on the call, the pandemic has truly, truly revealed, right, in such a huge way, some of these major health disparities that exist. And so it's clear to me that one of the key ways in which we need to move forward is to really directly address all of those trust issues. And at the end of the day, I think, like Jessica's saying, this means involving patients in the process, right? Having them feel like they have contributed. That way, you're just going to sort of naturally build that trust. Communication, education. I think there are many ways to use now technology, various ways to educate and build trust. I think as we do this and as we move together, I think the industry must collaborate. We must collaborate with each other. We must collaborate with our regulators, and it's about getting a singular message across that folks can sort of grab onto. I'm very optimistic because I think that one of the things the pandemic has done is to really bring to light the need for change. And my only hope is that with all the energy and collaboration and excitement that we see now, that will continue on right into the future.
Excellent points, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. You brought up the point of technology, and I'm going to tap Tammy in just a second to talk about technology and the role that it plays, and in how pharma and biotech and the CRO industry can really become partners. I think that you really brought up some really important points there. So, Tammy, I'm going to hand it over to you. Bring us home to the conclusion of this first section, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and conclude this, and Kat and I are going to talk a little bit about technology when we talk about overcoming barriers. But, as Elizabeth said, there's no doubt that COVID has accelerated the clinical trial process and all the things that we've been trying to do for a long time. So Kent and I have a very unique advantage from the CRO side of getting to see lots of different technologies and study designs and looking across the entire arena. So we know we have the tools to do it. We know we have the technology. We know we have the people. Now it's just time to actually do it, to the point of what Jessica was talking about, where Takeda has started and what we're seeing is change. But the other piece on the trust, along with patient advocacy groups and along with the sites, we can do all of that, but we also need bigger legislation that helps that happen. So when you bring, especially in what we're going through now, and trust being a big thing, we're going to need help from the government as it relates to regulations, legislations, grants, funding, all of that that's going to help bring this to the forefront so that the patients will trust again and that they know it's safe to be part of clinical trials. And this really is a care option for everyone, and that we're all working together. And I think what has been fantastic as we have watched the pharma, biotech, and CRO industry evolve over time is that we're working in closer collaboration with everyone right now than we ever have. And that's across all types of partners. And so everything's there to do it. It's just a stepwise change, and it's going to happen in steps, and we need to celebrate and publicize each one of those steps so that people know we're making progress and we have done what we said we were going to do, and now we're going to go on to that next step.
Absolutely. Let's celebrate those small wins and those big wins too, right? And those collaborations, as you said, are becoming so much more important. We have to be lockstep, hand in hand together to change what has been the status quo. So excellent points. And that brings us to our first poll. So Dan, if you wouldn't mind launching our poll.
Absolutely. So what we would like to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being no chance at all and 10 being absolutely, definitely, please rate the likelihood that the current pandemic will lead to active ethnic diversification in clinical trials. So a 1 is it's not going to happen, and a 10 is it's a certainty.
And
all right, the votes are streaming in.
Dan has the advantage because he gets the inside scoop as he sees the votes being registered.
I do. I get to see the horse race as it's going on. Okay, I'm going to say last call and close the poll. Let's share the results. And 4, so somewhere in the middle. Actually, it's kind of a bell curve, I would say. 4, 5, that middle area seems to have most of the votes. And that's probably what most people would expect now. It's hard to say which way it's going to go. Taren, do you have anything to add to that?
I think I'm a little bit disappointed, actually. I'd like to see that it was in the higher, that it absolutely is going to happen, because that means that the focus is in the right place in terms of when we're looking at clinical trial protocols and setting up clinical trials, that we are headed in the right direction. So I'm a little bit disappointed in that, I have to say. But
that is a lot of cynicism. Is what that is, right? And
I think so.
and I would say that's equally disappointing. This comes back to will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can talk about these results as a panel, and we should have that conversation. So, and I think it leads into our next bit of a conversation is like, how can we bridge those gaps, though? So, and that's pieces of it, right? So, so now that we see that we still have a lot of work to do to move forward and to remove some of the barriers that exist that have been talked about in the previous section, let's talk about the results and how the industry can move forward. Jessica, I know you're doing a lot of work at Takeda to clear the pathway. So talk to us a little bit more about some of your efforts.
Yeah, thanks, Taren. And it is an interesting statement, what we found there. I think that we do have an opportunity to make some real change with COVID-19, but it isn't simple. And I think that that's probably what we're seeing with the votes. Dollars can be helpful, but I think getting back to what Elizabeth said earlier, there's a lot of building of trust. And that is really foundational to what we need to do. And of course, you know from my previous comments that I believe that deep listening and showing that respect and dignity through that, that combined experience of sharing perspectives is critical to achieving success and building on COVID as a catalyst. We conducted a series of patient engagement activities last year focused on the burden of clinical trials to understand how we can lessen that burden for patient participation. And the recommendations coming out of last year really align quite well with a lot of the things that we're now having to do with COVID-19 and more virtualized clinical trials, which is great news. The issue is that we can't assume that we know how to implement some of these new mobile and digital technologies across the board, because we still need to listen to what patients need, their diverse perspectives. And so in the example before, we can decrease the barrier of the geographic reach of trials by using some of the telehealth and digital capabilities. The issue is that not all individuals want necessarily the same thing. So a couple weeks, I guess a month ago now, we had a co-creation session where our vendor partners and CROs, including Kent was, I was pleased that Kent was able to attend. We brought the patient perspective in by including patients in the workshop to help us understand what patients want with digital telehealth, EPROs, home health visits, what will work for them. And what we heard is that there's a real need for flexibility. In other words, what one person might want in terms of a home lab draw or infusion, another person might want to go to a local lab or imaging center because they have childcare issues or they have elderly family members. And so what might work for one person in the home might not work for another who has a different situation. And that's where we need to build in flexibility in these solutions so that it really does achieve the goals that we have here as a potential with COVID. COVID is definitely a forcing function, and it's decreasing barriers because it really is catalyzing the change that we need to make with technologies that have existed. But it's not a simple matter of just putting dollars and doing it. It's about partnering and deeply listening to build that trust and respond by implementing trials that really do address diverse patient needs.
Excellent, Jessica. And Elizabeth, I'm going to have you add to some of the comments you made earlier in terms of, you know, ways that we can increase trust. So what are some of the other barriers that we need to think about when we want to increase the representation in our clinical trials?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard some of this already from Jessica quite a bit, actually, around, you know, some of the things that end up being, in so many ways, so simple to solve and yet, you know, get overlooked, right? And as Jessica's emphasizing, just so important, you know, that unless you really understand what the patient is going through on a daily basis and what, you know, his or her whole life is about, right? There's just no way to really understand fully what the barriers might be. And I'm talking sort of on an individual basis, but obviously population level as well. And I think Jessica has already given a couple of great examples. I don't need to sort of really, you know, kill that anymore in terms of beating that horse. I mean, it's obvious. What I see, you know, and I think some of this in the poll, I think the responses to the poll, is that there's a lot of inertia, you know, in this industry. There's resistance to change. It just takes so much work, right? When folks are used to doing something a certain way, it's true in every piece of our lives, I think, but no doubt in industry, it is very difficult to, you know, take people out of the sort of the rat race that we're in every single day of just do, you know, and I got to get that protocol out. I got to get, you know, to say, hold on a minute, let's slow it down. That's very, very difficult to do given the demands, you know, I think that we all face. So I think that culture, just in terms of the industry, you know, and how people think about this is going to be really critically important if we're going to actually sort of in a really systematic way address the various barriers that exist. So inertia, And I think what we saw in the poll, as I was just saying, is, I feel like we've seen many examples where something really big happens, right? Like coronavirus. Not related to healthcare, but certainly 9/11 is coming up right tomorrow. And I think, if you think back to that time, there was so much optimism. We're going to come together as a country, unite, and we're all going to just hold hands together and go forward, and look at where we are now, right? As a nation. I mean, this is one of the most divided times. So I think there's a lot of cynicism, as Kent was saying. I totally agree. And so I find myself thinking, oh, okay, yeah, sure. We're having all this great collaboration. It's wonderful. We're all holding hands together and saying we need to, and is it really gonna hold? I mean, that's my concern, is how are we gonna, capture all these great conversations and sort of this recognition that we have of the need to break down some of these barriers. How are we actually going to translate that into real action? Right?
Absolutely. Kent, I'm going to turn to you now. So let's talk about how, your focus is on technology and how that can help bridge some of these gaps and bridge some of the barriers. So talk to me about a mobile health platform, the connected devices, and the virtual trials that you all are involved with, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's not always all about technology. I mean, technology seems to be the key enabler right now during COVID, which is fantastic. To the conversations that Elizabeth and Jessica just had, it's also as simple as starting with having this conversation at the protocol level to understand, are we selecting sites in racially diverse communities? I mean, that's the simplest. If 95% of your sites are in white urban areas, you know who's going to participate in your trial? White urban people. So, you can start with the simple piece, which is have the conversation about racial diversity in trials at site selection. Then you can start around education, building trust, once you have the right sites. The piece, telehealth, telemedicine, this is also generational. So if we look at the data on millennials, which is across the board, regardless of race, we see almost 70% of millennials no longer have primary care physicians. So they get most or the bulk of their care either from an ambulatory clinic, a Zoom care clinic, a community clinic, or through telehealth, telemedicine, or through connected health managing chronic illnesses. That is a fundamental crisis for pharma. If 70% of the largest generation in history no longer has a primary care physician that has a trusted relationship with them, where will pharma get patients for trials if they don't incorporate telemedicine, telehealth, mobile health, or ambulatory type clinics in their model? And so, what I have been raising my arms flailing across pharma for the last 2 years is, this is a crisis that is coming. It's not going to change, right? Millennials are not going to wake up tomorrow and say, you know what? I would rather participate in trials in an analog world where I use paper and go to the clinic 5 times a week and spend 5 hours in the clinic and don't do anything using my mobile health or my telehealth. That is not going to happen. We are not going backwards. And so this is not about if or when pharma is going to adopt. Pharma can go as slow as they want. What's going to happen is those recruitment rates that are at sub 0.5 patients per site per month will continue to go down to 0.1 and below 0.1. And then the financial and economic models for bringing drugs to market become unsustainable. And so, we can slow walk this. And that poll, which is just disheartening to me, is crazy. You can think that, but it's not going to change. So, when we think about diversity and access, this concept that Jessica brings up about being flexible, the one thing clinical trials in our industry is flexible, right? We have regulations, we have quality control, we have compliance. I have 400 people a day telling me what I can't do. What we are trying to do is flip that conversation. When we have folks in our industry that are regulators or in the compliance space or in the quality control space or the IT space, the conversation should be, how can we do this and still meet the spirit and confines of ICH GCP? Technology is very hard, right? People use their mobile phones for banking and healthcare already. Fitting that into our paradigm is challenging, but also making sure that drug developers understand software and technology comes with an entirely new set of challenges and problems that clinical people are not used to. So patience will be key as we move forward. But the reality is healthcare, and especially now with COVID, is going to continue to increase its delivery model using telehealth, telemedicine, and connected health for monitoring diseases. What we need our counterparts in drug development to do is to take those kind of blinders off and open their minds to say, when we write new protocols, who are we writing them for, right? Are we writing them for a middle-aged white man in New York City who has a fantastic job with paid time off, who can go to a clinic 3 times a week for 12 months and spend 6 hours a day and get all of that covered and has a spouse at home to take care of their kids? Or are we writing it for a single woman of color in a rural area who has 3 children and an hourly job that couldn't possibly ever take time off to participate in that trial to treat their equally challenging disease? And so the very model we have created by protocol design creates implicit bias in the patient populations we include. And so what drives me crazy is this is not rocket science. You can change the protocol to make that happen. This is not, I'm waiting for somebody to change something in the regulations. The FDA works with us every day. They're more than happy to have these conversations. They're actually driving these conversations. The only thing stopping us, and this is to Elizabeth's point, is inertia, right? It is the 12 people in a room that are like, let's pilot this for the next 2 years and see if it works. Like, we don't have to pilot this anymore, right? So anyways, I get a little bit worked up about this topic.
I love that. I think that's what's going to change things. There are people who have the passion for this and who are going to ease that inertia and, you know, make us move forward at a quicker pace. You know, Tammy, I want to turn to you now in terms of some of the other things that we were talking about in our pre-planning call, which was, you know, talking about AI, machine learning, integrated platforms. You know, and Kent made the point that it's not technology to solve everything, but technology can help. And these are some of the newer things that are coming online.
Yeah, and I think to Ken's point, it's all about using the tools and people being okay to use the tools. So if you're talking about doing a virtual trial, 100% virtual, that's going to make people nervous that have not done that before. I mean, there's a way to work into things, but there are things that have been around for quite a while. They're not super expensive or readily available that can do the things Ken was talking about. So we regularly use data for protocol optimization. We have an entire group of medical scientists that sit on millions and millions and millions of patient lives of data that use that data to optimize protocol design, to Ken's point, whether that's for ethnic diversification, or if it's just to make sure you're maximizing enrollment or standard of care, or that people can actually get to the trial and participate. That the data is there and everybody is using data now. You just actually have to apply the data and listen to what the data tells you. AI and machine learning, you know, I mean, that's just getting more robust and more robust. And when you think about using AI that can recognize patterns within data, just think about safety data, or just think about, you want to look across the databases that Ken's talking about to enroll patients or find patients. You can recognize those trends and those patterns within the subgroups that you want to do. And then the data that I was talking about, you add more data to that. The machine learning, it makes it smarter and smarter and allows us to take that task or that search or whatever we're trying to do and refine it even more. All of those things already exist, and they're not quite as scary as going out and, you know, doing your first completely virtual trial. I think hybrid's more going to be the way that we go with the integrated platforms. But to Jessica's point, you know, the focus group they did and the patients, my daughter, I had a visit with my daughter with her neurologist yesterday. It took 15 minutes out of my day, and they accomplished the entire visit because we used telehealth. And so if you can maintain that flexibility for the points of trials that you can, especially now, because who wants to go to the hospital 9 times for a dermatology study? And that's a true statement. During COVID, you know, we suggested that sponsor, you know, let's think about this as we continue on. So there's a lot of things that are available. We just have to use them.
I think that we're also hearing that it's, you know, this, there's an opportunity now to challenge the status quo. Just because it's been done that way forever doesn't mean that it needs to continue to be done that way in the future. Tammy, you touched upon a point there about hybrid clinical trials and decentralized clinical trials, which was a wonderful segue into our next poll. So I'm going to ask Dan to launch it, and let's see what the audience thinks about the possibility of the potential of hybrid or decentralized clinical trials. Dan, so we're going to ask, what percentage of your trials do you expect to be decentralized as part of after the pandemic? So 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51% to 75%, or 76 to 100%?
We'll give everybody just another moment to get in. And let's say last call here. And here's the results. So 0 to 25, the lowest quartile is the highest, but 31% for the second and third quartile. So it's pretty evenly distributed. Nobody went with the top number though. So what do we read out of that?
I think that jives with the information that I've been hearing, but I'd like to hear from our experts. I don't think we're ever going to see a fully, all trials go decentralized, but it's going to be some kind of a mix. But Kent and Tammy, tell me what you're seeing from your side.
I mean, some of it's definition, right? So I think you have to reset people's expectation. Almost every trial we do today has ePro involved.
Sure.
That is a decentralized type of, if it's done on a bring your own device model, we are already including decentralized parts and pieces in almost every trial. E-consent, ePro, eCOA, we use text message reminders. So there's some level in it. I think that people have this definition in their mind or kind of mythology built that everything's just going to be 100% virtual all the time. That's not what we're talking about, right? When Jessica talks about being flexible, it is about creating protocol designs that allow for the option of replacing some in-clinic visits with virtual telehealth visits, replacing some data points to be collected at home using FDA-cleared pulse oximeters, blood pressure cuffs, things like that. It is around using text message reminders for scheduling and medication compliance. So we're not talking about asking people to re-envision the world tomorrow. They are already doing pieces and parts of this. I just don't think they realize it falls into that kind of stepwise approach into a decentralized model. Again, this goes back to healthcare. Healthcare is already being delivered in a decentralized model. Not 100% of the time, but it absolutely is. So if you think that this is not going to change post-COVID, I don't know how to change your mind. The reality is COVID is not going away. COVID will be here for at least another 18 or 24 months in some level of impact. We see worldwide, we saw an 80% drop off and access to trial sites by patients during COVID in various countries. When flu season hits, we know we will see a resurgence worldwide in various. So if you don't adopt these tools in some sort of hybrid model, I don't know how we will continue to run trials while COVID pre-immunization or vaccinations is still with us. It's just not going to happen. So I don't know.
We've also, I think a lot of people are flying, you're building the plane while you're flying it. And so during COVID, for a lot of critical trials, we implemented this for people. That was the mind changer, and said these trials have to get done, and this is critical. And it kept a lot of things moving along, and people started to understand this is not as scary as we thought it was going to be, because we're basically doing some telehealth visits that people are used to doing, and we're adding some home health nursing to the protocol, and just figuring it out how things can continue on. That were very critical.
And we are currently running, and this started in March, I think, Tammy, right? The industry's first fully virtual registrational phase 3 trial in the patient population. So drug intervention for a disease state. And that is 100% virtual. It started right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we didn't miss a beat. We continued to screen patients, hundreds of patients during COVID. And so that model is not appropriate for every disease indication, but what it showed us is it can be done. Trust me, there have been a lot of bumps in the road, but to Jessica's point, you need to have that willingness to be patient to say, okay, this is new, right? We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater because we had a bug in our software, for 4 patients, or we had to release a patch and update the software. these are new ways of doing business, but it is being done, right? There are visionary companies. I think, Jessica, clearly your company is one of them. There are a number of other companies out there who have made public statements that they fully intend to go in some sort of decentralized model as their primary model moving forward. It's going to take everybody else underneath it, all the people that made those decisions to make it happen. But it can be done. It is being done, right?
It's really, in that particular trial, there's tens of thousands of patients, right? So it allows it to be done in an economic model for which you can actually do studies like that, because it's not, you know, costing you $350 million, you know, just to do the study. So
we have about 10 minutes left in our discussion, and I'll leave it to the panelists. Would you like to go on to our third section, or would you like to open it up for Q&A from the audience? Because we do have some questions flowing in.
I think
yeah,
questions are good.
Okay,
I'm flexible.
Their audience. So one of the questions here is, do you think there are more effective and impactful ways to involve and inform diverse communities about clinical trials?
Actually, I wanted to make a couple comments on that point, which is really the third section that we were going to address anyway. So I'll jump in with a few thoughts. Yeah, perfect, Tia. Like with patient engagement, there's a new recognition that community engagement is critical, and truly listening to what communities need, including for ongoing healthcare delivery, is essential to showing that respect for the community, meeting the community's needs, and does far more than just increasing the numbers of trial participants coming from that or another underserved population. So for example, in Africa, we had 4 years ago developed a pathology lab that would help a community to be able to detect cancer among its members. And a PCR machine that we trained the community members on how to use is now being used to detect COVID-19. And in setting up that lab and building the capability, we really demonstrated the long-term commitment that will ultimately, hopefully, at some point result in real collaboration for a clinical trial as well. And I think the more that we can partner with communities to actually address their needs and show this kind of commitment through learning and staying the course, we'll be able to create that win-win that we're looking for with increased representation of diverse patients in our clinical trials as well. And we also understand how to approach a clinical trial design that meets the needs of a particular community. For example, in Africa, again, where we really wanted to apply an approach to decentralized trials, we looked at a nodal approach where we didn't actually use devices so that individuals had to have smartphones and cell service or intranet service in their places where they live more remotely, but could come into a node and be treated there. Interestingly, that provided an opportunity not only to see if there were any other comorbidities or if there were food scarcity issues, but it also gave privacy and dignity to those who were involved in a trial where at home there's community living. They don't have a private space, and privacy and stigma is a real concern. So by partnering with communities, we can accomplish some of the same benefits in partnering with patients that helps with trial design and helps us ultimately serve the patients of that community.
And I think also understanding where those trusted relationships sit, right? So if you're thinking about a rural community, and this is really fascinating, in a lot of rural communities, most patients live several hours from the nearest healthcare provider. Where they are close to are retail centers. So if you take Walmart health centers as an example, Walmart pharmacies, a lot of those rural patients, their only regular contract with a healthcare provider is the pharmacist at their local Walmart. And so that seems like maybe not as an intuitive place to educate people, but pharmacists have tremendous relationships with people that are coming to get their meds every single week or every single month. And so you can utilize non-traditional outlets for education, general education around What is a trial? Could I be a participant in a trial? In some cases, we can even use those types of pharmacy clinics to actually run the trial, depending on the disease state. Community clinics in racially diverse areas. Elizabeth, you mentioned the Native Americans. I mean, the disproportionate impact of the Navajo tribe by COVID, actually sitting down and setting up educational centers within the tribal healthcare clinics is critical to create a trust factor for when a vaccine is developed. But we need to be doing that now, right? And so it is thinking about non-traditional areas and having that conversation. I think people are also super uncomfortable talking about ethnically diverse, people of color, Black patients. It is a topic that makes people uncomfortable. And so in drug development circles, we just don't do it, right? We don't have those conversations up front. So you can't actually start to educate people until you're willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know, I have to say, I think, you know, that the need to adapt to the environment, right, that in which you're working is essentially what Ken and Jessica have been talking about, right? You know, sort of forcing a model into, you know, an environment that just where it's just not going to work. We've tried that for years and years and years. It's obvious that it doesn't work. And I think all of us here on this panel certainly understand that need for adaptability. So to me, this just is about ongoing conversations, ongoing discussions, sort of educating ourselves really and our you know, industry partners on the need for, you know, this adaptation, flexibility, whatever you want to call it.
And I know we only have a few minutes left. I don't want to miss the piece on biology, Taren. So the one thing to remember about the reason diversity is important is biology. If you think back to the tyrosine kinase inhibitors and gefitinib in the early days, had they not had East Asian, younger, non-smoking women in that trial, that drug would have failed, right? Because that molecular target, you know, that when you look at the expression of EGFR in that population, it's like 60 or 70% compared to Caucasians, where it's like 7 or 8%. And so we know the molecular basis for disease, especially in diseases like oncology and precision medicine, are so specific now. If you don't think about racial diversity, we may, one, a very good drug that could help a particular population may fail, right? Just because your numbers. But number two, you may miss an entire population simply by not having a diverse community. That's on gender, that's on race, that's on ethnicity. And so this is a scientific discussion that can't be passed up either. So not only is it protocol design and clinical development, at the scientific level, understanding mechanism, target, precision, and its impact on ethnic and racially diverse communities is equally critical. So all of these pieces are tied together to ensure we get good drugs to the right patients.
Absolutely. And I want to just recap here. So Ken, to your point, we really do need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and having these conversations in order to change the paradigm and increase our outreach to diverse communities and make sure that we are getting the right people in the right trials and thinking about it from a biological standpoint and relying on the science as well. So I want to thank our panel, Jessica, Tammy, Kent, and Elizabeth, for a really rich conversation. And I can't thank you enough for your sponsorship of this panel, and the great comments that were coming in through the chat room really resonate. So this is obviously a topic that is going to be continued, and we need to talk about it more and more. So thank you all very much.
For more Pharma Voice 100 content, visit www.pharmavoice100.com.